The wind screamed down the mountain pass, a banshee howl that rattled the windows of Jack Tanner's beat-up truck as he gripped the wheel. Squinting through the blizzard, snow lashed the windshield in furious waves, each flake a tiny dagger glinting in the dim glow of his headlights. It was late, too late to be out on a night like this, but Jack didn't have a choice. The call had come an hour ago. Mrs. Larson's furnace was out again, and with the temperature plunging below zero, he couldn't leave the old widow to freeze. Havens Hollow wasn't the kind of place where you ignored a neighbor's plea, not if you were Jack Tanner. His breath fogged in the cab, his knuckles white against the cold leather of the steering wheel. He was tired, bone-deep tired, after a day of patching roofs and hauling firewood. But that was life here. A quiet grind under the shadow of the Rockies. The truck lurched as a gust slammed into it, tires skidding on the icy road. Jack cursed under his breath, easing off the gas. His hazel eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the empty passenger seat where a booster chair used to sit. Ellie, his 6-year-old, was back at the cabin with Mrs. Perry, the neighbor who'd become a surrogate grandma since Sarah walked out 2 years ago. The memory stung, a sharp, familiar ache, but he shoved it down. Focusing on the road, Ellie was his world now, a bright spark in a life that felt increasingly gray. He'd do anything to keep her safe, to keep her smiling, even if it meant dragging himself through nights like this. That's when he saw it, a faint flicker through the whiteout, headlights wobbling like a drunkard on the edge of the ditch. Jack slowed, peering through the storm. A sleek black car, too fancy for these parts, was half buried in a snowbank, its rear tires spinning uselessly. Someone was inside, a shadow moving behind the fog glass. He didn't hesitate. Pulling over, he grabbed his flashlight and yanked his coat tighter, the wind biting at his stubbled jaw as he stepped into the chaos. "Havena," he shouted, voice swallowed by the gale as he trudged toward the car. The window cracked open, revealing a woman's face, pale, wide-eyed, and utterly out of place. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her coat a thin, stylish thing that wouldn't last 10 minutes in this cold. She looked at him like he was a ghost materializing from the snow. "You okay?" Jack called, shining the light toward her. Her lips parted, trembling slightly. I think I'm stuck." "Sonen," she said, her voice soft but clipped, like she was holding something back. Jack nodded, assessing the situation. The car was a goner until the storm passed. No way those tires were gripping anything tonight. "You're not getting out of here in this," he said, blunt but not unkind. "Come with me. I've got a place nearby." Her eyes darted to the road, then back to him, hesitation flickering across her face. Jack raised his hands, palms up, snow clinging to his gloves. "Got a kid at home. It's safe." That seemed to tip the scales. She gave a small nod, grabbing a leather bag from the passenger seat before stepping out, wincing as the wind hit her full force. "Her name," she said as they trudged back to his truck, "was Lena Voss." Jack didn't ask more, not yet. He was too focused on getting them both out of the cold, his boots crunching through the drifts as she stumbled behind, her thin heels useless in the snow. Inside the truck, the heater sputtered to life, and Lena sat rigid, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Jack stole a glance at her, sharp cheekbones, a faint smudge of exhaustion under her eyes. She didn't belong here. That much was clear, but he wasn't one to pry, not unless she wanted him to. The cabin came into view 10 minutes later, a squat, weathered thing nestled against a stand of pines. Smoke curled from the chimney. "One you wonder why she not?" A faint promise of warmth. Jack killed the engine and led Lena inside, the door creaking as it swung open. Mrs. Perry looked up from the couch, her knitting needles pausing mid-stitch. Ellie, done in, curled beside her with a picture book, blinked sleepily at the stranger. "Who's that?" "Daddy," she asked, her voice a soft chirp. Jack crouched beside her, brushing a blonde curl from her forehead. "This is Miss Lena. She's staying with us tonight, 'cause of the storm." Ellie tilted her head, curious but shy, then went back to her book. Lena stood awkwardly near the door, snow melting off her coat onto the scuffed floorboards. Jack waved her toward the fireplace. "Warm up. I'll get some coffee going." She nodded, peeling off her gloves with delicate fingers, her gaze darting around the room, taking in the faded curtains, the stack of Ellie's drawings on the table, the patched armchair that sagged under its own weight. Jack watched her from the corner of his eye as he filled the kettle. She was a puzzle, this woman, polished and poised, Yet something about her felt fragile, like glass on the verge of cracking. Mrs. Perry excused herself not long after, pulling on her coat with a knowing smile. I'll leave you to it, Jack. Might. Ellie bug. Ellie giggled, waving as the older woman slipped out into the storm. Jack handed Lena a chipped mug, the steam curling between them. You're not from around here, he said. Not a question. She took the coffee, her fingers brushing his briefly, cool against his calloused skin. Moa! Nara nar! She admitted, staring into the fire. Just passing through. Her voice was quiet, but there was a weight to it. A story she wasn't telling. Jack didn't push. He'd learned long ago that silence often said more than words. Ellie patted over a moment later, clutching a crayon drawing. A crooked house with a big yellow sun. Do you like pictures? She asked Lena. Her hazel eyes, Jack's eyes, bright with hope. Lena blinked, then softened, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I do did we knee, she said, crouching to Ellie's level. This is beautiful, Ellie beamed, launching into a rambling explanation of the stick figures. Her, Daddy, and Mrs. Tibwin, Perry under the sun. Jack watched, a warmth spreading in his chest despite the chill seeping through the walls. Lena's smile grew, tentative but real, and for a moment, the room felt less empty. Later, after Ellie was tucked into bed, her stuffed bear clutched tight, Jack stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the snow swirling under the porch light. Lena sat by the fire, her mug cradled in her hands. You live here alone, Sri? She asked, breaking the quiet. Jack turned, leaning against the counter. Me and Ellie. Been that way a while. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the flames. It's peaceful, she murmured, though her tone carried something heavier, longing. Maybe. Jack studied her, the way her shoulders hunched slightly, the faint tremor in her fingers. You running from something? He asked. Voice low, her head snapped up, eyes wide, but she didn't deny it. Maybe, she said finally, barely above a whisper. Too much noise back there. He didn't press further. Instead, he pointed to the small guest room off the hall. You can sleep there. Ellie's got my bed tonight. Lena opened her mouth, maybe to argue, but closed it again. Nodding. Thank you, she said, and the gratitude in her voice felt raw, unguarded. Jack just tipped his head, turning back to the window as she slipped away. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, something quieter was stirring, a shift he couldn't quite name. Morning broke gray and heavy, the snow piled high against the cabin walls. Jack was up early, stoking the fire, the crackle of logs filling the stillness. Ellie bounded in soon after, her energy a stark contrast to the muted world outside. Lena emerged last, her hair loose now, wearing one of Ellie's old sweaters Jack had left out. It hung loose on her frame, softening her edges. Morning, Rokromodimons, she said, her voice lighter but still cautious. Jack slid a mug of coffee her way. Roads are a mess. You're stuck here till it clears. She nodded, wrapping her hands around the warmth, her eyes flicking to Ellie, who was already tugging at her sleeve. Can I show you the shed? Daddy keeps tools there. Jack raised an eyebrow. Snow's deep. Kiddo! But Ellie's pout was relentless, and Lena surprised him with a small laugh. I don't mind, she said, glancing at him for permission. Jack shrugged, grabbing his coat. Stay close. The shed was a rickety thing, sagging under years of neglect. But Ellie darted ahead, pointing out the rusty tools and a bird's nest tucked in the rafters. Lena followed, her steps careful, her breath clouding in the frigid air. Jack watched as she listened to Ellie's chatter, her smile growing less guarded with each passing minute. Daddy fixes everything, Ellie said proudly, and Lena's gaze slid to him, something curious flickering there. That's so? She asked. Jack shrugged, brushing snow off a workbench. Try to. Back inside, the day unfolded slowly. Lena helped Ellie color, her hands steady as she traced lines beside the little girl's wild scribbles. Jack fixed a leaking pipe, stealing glances at them from the hall. There was an ease to it, Lena's quiet presence filling a space he hadn't realized was hollow. By afternoon, the snow eased, and Jack stepped outside to check the road. Lena followed, her borrowed coat dwarfing her frame. You always do this, she asked, watching him shovel a path. Fix things. He paused, leaning on the shovel. Someone's gotta, she bit her lip, then said, where I'm from, People pay others to handle everything. Jack met her gaze, snowflakes catching in his lashes. Sometimes doing it yourself is the only way to know it's done right. Her eyes held his, something shifting behind them, understanding, maybe, or recognition. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Jack found Lena by the fire, staring into the flames. "You're good with her," he said, settling into the armchair across from her. She looked up, surprised Ray Wu. "She's easy to be around." He nodded, folding his arms. "Not everyone gets that." Lena hesitated, then turned back to the fire. "I didn't have much family growing up. Just so pressure." Her voice was soft, brittle. Jack didn't push, but he felt it, the cracks she carried. Not so different from his own. "You don't have to say more," he said quietly. She nodded, relief flickering across her face, and they sat in silence, the fire casting long shadows across the room. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Haven's Hollow blanketed in white silence. Jack stood at the sink, watching the road. When Lena approached, her bag slung over her shoulder. "I should go," she said, though her tone wavered. Jack turned, his chest tightening. "Roads are clear if you're sure." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on Ellie's drawings. On the worn couch. "In Guadalino, Artin, on him." "Thank you." "Sure, Jack," she said, and the way she said his name, soft, unguarded, stuck with him long after her taillights disappeared down the mountain. Days passed, and life settled back into its rhythm, fixing roofs, reading to Ellie, keeping the cabin warm. But Jack couldn't shake her. Lena Voss had slipped into his world like a ghost, leaving echoes he didn't know how to quiet. Ellie noticed too, asking one night as he tucked her in, "Is Miss Lena coming back?" Jack smoothed her hair, his throat tight. "Don't know, kiddo." But he hoped, damn it. He hoped, and that scared him more than he'd admit. It was a week later when the black car rolled back into Haven's Hollow, parking outside the cabin just as dust settled over the pines. Jack stepped onto the porch, heart thudding, as Lena climbed out, her coat still too thin, her eyes searching his. "I couldn't leave," she said simply, her voice trembling but sure. Jack crossed the distance between them, snow crunching under his boots, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe in something more than just getting by. "Then stay," he said, and the word felt like a promise. The porch light flickered as Jack held Lena's gaze, the cold air biting at his cheeks while her words hung between them like a fragile thread. "Then stay, yes, he'd said, and the weight of it settled deep in his chest, a mix of relief and something sharper. Hope, maybe, or fear that he was opening a door he'd long kept shut. Lena's lips parted, her breath clouding in the dusk, and for a moment, she just stood there, her dark eyes wide and unguarded. Then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and Jack felt the tension in his shoulders ease. "Just a little, come inside," he said, stepping back to let her pass. She hesitated, clutching her bag tighter, then crossed the threshold, her boots leaving faint wet prints on the weathered floorboards. Ellie's voice floated from the kitchen, a cheerful hum as she colored at the table, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in her father's heart. Jack closed the door behind Lena, the click of the latch loud in the stillness, and watched as she set her bag down, her movements careful, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Ellie looked up, her crayon pausing mid-scribble. "Miss Lena," she squealed, scrambling off her chair and racing over, her blonde curls bouncing. Lena's face softened instantly, a smile breaking through the uncertainty as she knelt to meet Ellie's hug. "Hey, you was you didn't wash you." "Sure," she said, her voice warm, and Jack caught the way her hands lingered on Ellie's shoulders. Gentle but steady, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, feeling the ache of something he couldn't name bloom in his chest. Ellie pulled back, beaming. "Are you staying this time?" Lena glanced at Jack, her smile faltering for a split second before she nodded. I think so." Ellie clapped her hands, darting back to the table to grab her drawing. "Look, I made this for you." It was another crooked house, this time with 3 stick figures, Jack, Ellie, and a third with dark hair, standing under a lopsided sun. Lena took it, her fingers tracing the lines, and Jack saw the flicker of emotion in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or gratitude. "It's perfect," she said softly, and Ellie glowed under the praise. Jack cleared his throat, pushing off the wall. "You hungry?" I was about to heat up some stew. Lena straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That sounds good. Her voice was quieter now, less certain, and Jack wondered what she wasn't saying. What had brought her back after a week of silence? But he didn't ask. Not yet. He busied himself at the stove. The clatter of pots, a welcome distraction, while Ellie dragged Lena to the couch, chattering about the snowman they'd built with Mrs. Perry that morning. Dinner was simple, beef stew and bread he'd baked earlier. The kind of meal that filled the belly without fuss. They ate at the small table, Ellie's chatter filling the gaps as Lena picked at her food, her eyes darting to Jack every so often. He caught her looking once, their gazes locking for a heartbeat too long, and she quickly dropped hers, a faint flush creeping up her neck. Jack shoveled a spoonful of stew into his mouth, ignoring the way his pulse kicked up. Storm's supposed to hit again tomorrow. Funasir, he said, keeping his tone casual. Good thing you got here when you did. Lena nodded, setting her spoon down. Yahabon, shumped him. Timing's not my strong suit. There was a wry edge to her words, a hint of something bitter, and Jack's curiosity stirred. But Ellie piped up before he could respond. Can we play in the snow tomorrow? Daddy. With Miss Lena, Jack glanced at Lena, raising an eyebrow. Up to her, Lena's smile returned. Small but genuine. I'd like that. Ellie whooped, and Jack couldn't help the faint grin tugging at his lips. Later one, after Ellie was tucked in, her giggles fading into soft snores, Jack found Lena by the fire again, her knees drawn up, staring at the flames like they held answers. He settled into the armchair, the silence stretching between them, comfortable but charged. You didn't have to come back, he said finally, his voice low. She didn't look at him, but her fingers tightened around her mug. I know, she said, but I couldn't stay away. Her words were soft, almost lost in the crackle of the logs, and Jack felt them settle into him, heavy and warm. What's back there? He asked, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. What you're running from? Lena's shoulders stiffened, and for a moment, he thought she'd shut down. But then she exhaled, long and shaky, and turned to face him. Everything, she said, her voice raw. A life I didn't choose. People who want me to be someone I'm not. She paused, her eyes searching his. I'm not who you think I am, Jack. He frowned, waiting. She took a breath. My name's Lena Voss. Voss as in Voss Industries. My family, we've got money. A lot of it. And I've spent my whole life trying to escape it. Jack blinked, the pieces clicking into place. The fancy car, her polished edges, the way she carried herself like she was used to being watched. He leaned back, processing. So you're rich, he said, matter of fact. Lena winced, like the word stung. It's more than that. It's expectations, control. In one, what are you? I was supposed to take over, play the part, but I couldn't breathe there. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, ashamed. Jack studied her, the firelight playing across her face, and saw the weight she carried. Not so different from his own, just dressed up fancier. Money doesn't mean much here, he said quietly. You've seen this place. Just hush your so we get by on what we've got. She nodded, swallowing hard. That's why I came back. It's real here. You and my surname. Ellie, it's not about what I can give or what I'm worth. Jack's chest tightened at that, at the way her voice trembled with something like hope. He stood, crossing to the fireplace, and added a log, the sparks flaring bright. You don't have to explain yourself to me, he said, glancing back at her. But if you're staying, it's because you want to, not because you're hiding. Lena's eyes met his, shimmering faintly. I want to, she whispered, and the certainty in her voice sent a jolt through him. He nodded, turning back to the fire, and they sat there as the night deepened, the storm gathering outside while something steadier took root within. The next morning, the snow fell thick and fast, blanketing Haven's Hollow in a hush that felt almost sacred. Jack woke to the sound of Ellie giggling in the kitchen, and when he shuffled in, he found her perched on a stool, Lena beside her, both of them dusted with flour. We're making pancakes, Ellie announced, waving a spatula. Lena looked up, a smear of batter on her cheek, and grinned, a real, unguarded grin that hit Jack like a punch. Hope you don't mind, she said. He shook his head, a warmth spreading through him. Not at all. They spent the day snowed in, pancakes for breakfast, a snowman in the yard, Ellie's laughter ringing through the cold. Lena threw herself into it, her hesitance melting away as she chased Ellie through the drifts, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Jack watched from the porch, his hands stuffed in his pockets, feeling the edges of his guarded heart soften. She fit here, somehow, her and Ellie, like pieces he hadn't known were missing. By evening, the storm had eased, and Jack headed into town to check on Mrs. Larson underwritten one. Lena offered to come, tugging on her borrowed coat. Per I want to help. She didn't form particular, she said, her tone firm. Jack didn't argue. They trudged through the snow, delivering firewood to a few neighbors. Lena's hands raw from the cold, but her face bright with purpose. At Mrs. Surya Larson's, the old woman squinted at Lena, then at Jack. She's a keeper, if her nothing we want to start doing. This one, she said with a wink. Jack grunted, but his ears burned as Lena ducked her head, smiling. And back at the cabin, Ellie asleep and the fire low. Jack handed Lena a mug of tea. You didn't have to do all that today, he said. She shrugged, sipping the tea. Felt good. Like I was part of something. He nodded, settling beside her on the couch, their shoulders brushing. You are? He said quietly, and the words felt bigger than he'd meant them to. Lena looked at him, her eyes soft, and for the first time, Jack let himself wonder what it might be like to have her stay, not just for a night, but for good. The days after the storm stretched into a quiet rhythm. The kind Haven's Hollow wore like a second skin, slow, steady, unbroken by the noise of the outside world. Jack woke each morning to the same routine. Coffee brewing on the stove, Ellie's chatter filling the cabin, the soft creak of floorboards under his boots. But now there was Lena, her presence threading through it all like a new stitch in an old quilt. She'd stayed past that first night back, her sleek car still parked outside, gathering a thin layer of snow as if it, too, had decided to settle in. Jack didn't ask how long she planned to stay, didn't want to jinx it. Maybe, and she didn't offer. They just moved through the days together, a fragile ease settling between them. Lena slipped into their lives with a quiet grace that surprised him. She'd help Ellie with her coloring, her long fingers guiding the crayons with a patience Jack hadn't expected from someone who'd grown up with silver spoons in boardrooms. She'd linger in the kitchen while he cooked, asking questions about the town, about the people, her voice soft but curious. Jack answered in his usual clipped way, short sentences, no fluff, but he found himself talking more than he had in years. Her presence pulling words out of him like water from a well he'd thought long dry. Ellie adored her. That much was clear from the way she'd tug Lena's hand, dragging her outside to build snow forts or inside to read stories by the fire. Miss Lena, look, she'd say, holding up a lopsided snow angel or a page torn from her book. And Lena would smile, really smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened the sharp edges of her face. Jack watched it all from the sidelines, a warmth blooming in his chest that he tried to ignore, but couldn't quite shake. It scared him, that feeling, how easy it was to get used to her here, how much he wanted her to stay. One afternoon, a week after her return, Jack was out in the shed, tinkering with a busted generator Mrs. Perry had asked him to fix. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue that made the snow shimmer like glass. Lena appeared in the doorway, her breath clouding as she leaned against the frame, watching him work. You ever get tired of fixing things, ma frère? She asked, her tone light but edged with something deeper. Jack glanced up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Not really, he said. Keeps me busy. She nodded, stepping inside, her boots crunching on the dirt floor. Must be nice, knowing you can make something work again. He paused, studying her. She was bundled in one of his old flannels, the sleeves rolled up, her dark hair loose and catching the light. There was a wistfulness in her voice, a crack in the polished shell she'd worn when she first arrived. You don't fix things where you're from, he asked, setting the wrench down. Lena's lips twitched, a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not like this. Back there, it's all disposable. People, sometimes, her words hung heavy, and Jack felt a pang of recognition. Different worlds, same scars. He nodded, turning back to the generator, but her gaze lingered on him, steady and searching. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Jack found Lena on the porch, staring out at the mountains. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the snow, and her silhouette was sharp against it. Her arms wrapped tight around herself. He stepped outside, the cold biting at his knuckles as he joined her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough from the quiet. She didn't answer right away, just kept her eyes on the ridge, the wind tugging at her hair. I don't know," she said finally, soft and honest. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to feel temporary." Jack shifted, leaning against the railing beside her. "Does it?" She turned to him then, her eyes dark and unguarded. "No," she admitted. "That's what scares me." He frowned, not sure what to say. She took a shaky breath, her hands gripping the wood. "I've spent my whole life running from my family, from what they want me to be. I thought I'd keep running forever. But here," she trailed off, looking at him like he might have the answer. Jack's throat tightened. "You don't have to run here," he said, echoing the words he'd said before, but this time they felt heavier, more certain. Lena's eyes shimmered, and she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she brushed it away. "I want to believe that," she whispered. Jack reached out, hesitant, then rested his hand over hers on the railing. Her skin was cold, her fingers trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away. They stood there, as heard him and everyone, the night wrapping around them. And for the first time, Jack let himself feel it, the possibility of something more, something solid. The next morning, Havens Hollow woke to a rare break in the weather, the sun cutting through the clouds in sharp, golden streaks. Jack was up early, splitting wood by the shed, when Ellie burst out of the cabin, Lena trailing behind her. "Daddy, can we go to town?" Ellie asked, bouncing on her toes. Miss Lena said, "There's a cafe." Jack glanced at Lena, Suri, who shrugged, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Heard it from Mrs. Newan. Perry," she said. "Thought it might be fun." Jack set the axe down, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "All right. Let's go." The walk into town was slow, Ellie skipping ahead while Jack and Lena followed, their steps crunching in sync. Havens Hollow wasn't much, just a handful of shops, a gas station, and Millie's Cafe, a squat building with peeling red paint and a sign that swung crookedly in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried dough, and Millie herself, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked up from the counter as they walked in. "Jack Tanner, Shashunu," she said, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "And who's this Harari? Surdi and me dit Suron." Her gaze slid to Lena. "Appraising Lena Voss," Lena said, offering a polite smile. "Just visiting." Millie raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. "Well, when?" "Sit down. Got fresh donuts if the kid's hungry," Ellie squealed, dragging Lena to a booth while Jack followed, a faint grin tugging at his mouth. They ordered coffee for him, hot chocolate for Ellie, tea for Lena, and settled in, the chatter of locals washing over them. Jack watched as Lena listened to Ellie's endless stream of questions, her answers patient, her laughter soft. Millie caught his eye from behind the counter, giving him a knowing nod that made his ears burn. Halfway through their drinks, the door swung open, and Ira Jenkins shuffled in, his cane tapping against the floor. He was a fixture in town, old as the mountains, with a voice like gravel and a knack for showing up when you least expected. "Tanner," he greeted. "If he'd were worrying Monars," easing into the booth across from them. "Oh, heard you've got company." His eyes flicked to Lena. "Curious but kind," Jack grunted. "Something like that." Ira chuckled, then turned to Lena. "You sticking around, or just passing through?" Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I'm figuring that out," she said, her voice steady but laced with something vulnerable. Ira nodded, like he understood more than he let on. "Town's got a way of keeping folks who need it," he said, then sipped his coffee, leaving the words to settle. Jack glanced at Lena, catching the way her lips pressed together, the faint flush on her cheeks. He didn't say anything, but Ira's words stuck with him, burrowing deep. Back at the cabin, the day faded into dusk, the sky bruising purple over the peaks. Ellie was sprawled by the fire, reading aloud from her favorite book, while Lena sat cross-legged beside her, listening intently. Jack stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, the clink of plates a quiet counterpoint to Ellie's voice. He glanced over at them, Lena's head tilted, Her smile soft and felt a pang, sharp and sudden. This was what he'd wanted for Ellie, for himself. A home that didn't feel half empty. And Lena, with her quiet strength and her cracks laid bare, was making it real. Later, after Ellie was in bed, Jack stepped outside, needing the cold to clear his head. Lena joined him, her footsteps soft on the porch. "She's something else," Lena said, nodding toward the cabin. Ellie, Surnandarum. Jack nodded, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Yeah, Denomont. Keeps me going." Lena leaned against the railing, her gaze distant. "You're a good dad." Jack. "She's lucky." Her voice was quiet, tinged with something like envy. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what I can." She turned to him then, her eyes searching his. "You don't have to do it alone. You know." The words hit him hard, cracking open something he'd kept locked tight. He looked at her. Really looked, and saw the offer there. Not pity, not charity, but something real. "Neither do you," he said, his voice rough. Lena's breath hitched, and for a moment, they just such stood there. The space between them shrinking until it felt like nothing at all. The air between Jack and Lena crackled with something unspoken. The cold night pressing in around them as their breaths mingled in faint clouds. Her words, "You don't have to do it alone," echoed in his head, stirring a tangle of emotions he'd buried deep since Sarah left. Jack's jaw tightened, his hands flexing in his pockets as he fought the urge to step closer, to bridge the gap that felt both vast and paper-thin. Lena's eyes held his, dark and steady, and for the first time, he saw past the polished exterior she'd worn like armor, saw the loneliness there, the quiet ache that mirrored his own. "I've been alone a long time," he said finally, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Me and Ellie. We've made it work." Lena nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line as she looked away. "Out at the shadowed peaks. I get that," she said softly. "I've been alone too, just in a different way. Surrounded by people, but not really seen." Her voice trembled on the last word, and Jack felt it hit him square in the chest, a pang of recognition that made his throat tighten. He took a step closer, the porch creaking under his weight, and rested a hand on the railing beside hers. "You're seen here," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Lena's head snapped back to him, her eyes wide, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. She didn't say anything, but her hand shifted, her fingers brushing his, tentative, electric. Jack didn't pull away, and neither did she. They stood there, the silence stretching long and heavy, until the cold finally drove them back inside. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the snow glittering under a rare burst of sunlight. Ellie was up early, her energy spilling over as she begged to go sledding. Jack glanced at Lena over his coffee, raising an eyebrow. "You up for it?" Lena grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Try and stop me." Half an hour later, they were trudging up the hill behind the cabin, Ellie dragging a battered sled Jack had patched together years ago. The air was sharp, biting at their cheeks, but Ellie's laughter rang out like a bell, cutting through the stillness. At the top, Ellie plopped onto the sled, tugging Lena's sleeve. "Come with me." Lena hesitated, glancing at Jack, who shrugged with a faint smirk. "Your funeral?" he said. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that made his chest ache, and climbed on behind Ellie, wrapping her arms around the little girl. Jack gave them a push, and they shot down the hill, Ellie's squeals mixing with Lena's startled yelp as they hit a bump and tumbled into the snow. Jack jogged down after them, his boots sinking deep, and found them sprawled in a heap, Ellie giggling uncontrollably while Lena brushed snow from her hair, her face flushed and bright. "You okay?" he asked, offering a hand. Lena took it, her grip firm as he pulled her up, and for a moment, they stood close, too close, her breath warm against his cheek. "Never better." "Nana Suriyamon, Surin," she said, her voice soft, and Jack felt his pulse kick up, a heat spreading through him despite the cold. Ellie scrambled to her feet, tugging at them both. "Again, honey." Again. They spent the morning like that, sledding and laughing, the hill alive with their voices. And Jack couldn't remember the last time the world had felt this light. Back at the cabin, they warmed up with hot cocoa. Ellie curled between them on the couch, her head resting on Lena's arm. Jack watched them, the fire casting soft shadows across their faces, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his bones. This, whatever it was, wasn't just a fluke. Lena feet here, not as a guest or a stranger, but as something more. The thought scared him, but it thrilled him too. A flicker of possibility he hadn't dared entertain since everything fell apart. That afternoon, Jack headed into town to fix a busted pipe at Millie's cafe. Lena tagged along, Ellie in tow, her small hand tucked in Lena's as they walked. Millie greeted them with her usual sharp-eyed grin, tossing a rag at Jack. "About time you showed up," she said, then nodded at Lena. "You're sticking around. I'm coming in interior, der menam one." "Huh?" Lena smiled. A little shy, seems that way. Millie's gaze lingered, appraising, before she jerked her head toward the kitchen. Coulda dinner sigudawam. Town could use some fresh blood. Hey, woo. While Jack worked, Lena and Ellie helped Millie behind the counter, Ellie proudly handing out napkins while Lena poured coffee. Her movements awkward but earnest. Jack caught snippets of their chatter through the wall. Millie's dry humor, Lena's quiet replies, Ellie's endless questions, and felt a warmth he couldn't shake. When he finished, Millie slid him a coffee and a donut, her eyes flicking between him and Lena. "She's good for you," she said under her breath. Too low for Lena to hear. Jack grunted, his ears burning, but he didn't argue. On the walk back, the sun dipped low, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Ellie skipped ahead, kicking at drifts, while Lena walked beside Jack, her shoulder brushing his every few steps. "Millie likes you." "He went. Sir Nainum," he said, Ikwansurum, glancing at her. Lena laughed softly. "She's tough to read." Jack nodded. "She's tough. Period. But she's got a soft spot for people who show up." Lena's smile faded slightly, her eyes distant. "I've never been good at that, showing up." "Not for real." Jack slowed, turning to her. "You're doing it now," he said, his voice steady. She met his gaze, something raw flickering there, and nodded. "Yeah, when I asked, I guess I am." That night, after Ellie was asleep, Jack found Lena in the kitchen, staring at a stack of bills on the counter. He'd left them out by mistake, past due notices, repair invoices, the kind of paper trail that told the story of a man stretched thin. She looked up, guilt flashing across her face. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "They were just there." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's fine, not much to hide." She hesitated, then pointed to one of the invoices. "Voss Industries, Shuri one. You've done work for them." Jack frowned, stepping closer. "Yeah, Sartmodpin. Fixed some equipment at their warehouse down in the valley last year." "Why?" Lena's breath hitched, her fingers trembling slightly. "That's my family's company," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack blinked, the connection sinking in. "Small world," he said, keeping his tone even. She nodded, her eyes dropping to the table. "I didn't know, I swear." He studied her, the way her shoulders hunched, the fear in her voice, like she thought this changed something. "Doesn't matter. When Hatzich he said finally. "That's not you." Lena looked up, surprised, relief flooding her face. "You mean that Mitraniduriturmon?" Jack nodded, stepping closer until he could feel the warmth of her. "Yafornidewon. I mean it." She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her, and Jack reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was soft under his calloused fingers, and she leaned into the touch. Just as slightly, her eyes locking with his, the air shifted, charged with something neither of them could ignore. And for a moment, Jack thought about closing the distance, about kissing her, right there in the dim light of the kitchen. But Ellie's soft snore drifted from the hall, and he pulled back, his heart pounding. "We should sleep," he said, his voice rough. Lena nodded, her cheeks flushed, and they parted in silence, the unspoken hanging heavy between them. The next morning, Jack woke to find Lena gone, not gone, but out on the porch, her coat pulled tight as she stared at the mountains. He joined her, the cold biting at his knuckles. "You're up early," he said. She turned, her eyes bright but troubled. "Couldn't sleep. Too much in my head." He nodded, waiting. She took a breath. "I want to stay," she added. "Jack. For real. But I need to figure out what that means. How to be here without dragging everything I left behind with me." Her voice was firm, determined, and Jack felt a surge of pride he hadn't expected. "You'll figure it out," he said. "You're tougher than you think." She smiled, small but real, and for the first time, Jack believed they might just build something. Together, the sun climbed higher over Haven's Hollow, its light spilling across the snow in a way that made the world feel new. Untouched, Jack stood on the porch beside Lena, her words still ringing in his ears. "I want to stay." Jack, for real, for real. Suri, and he felt a quiet shift inside him, like a gear clicking into place after years of grinding. He didn't say anything right away, just let the moment settle. The cold air sharp against his skin as he watched her. She hugged her arms tighter around herself, her dark hair catching the breeze, and there was a fire in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Determination, raw and unpolished, cutting through the doubt she'd carried since she arrived. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said finally, his voice steady but soft. "Not yet." Lena turned to him, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself, nodding instead. "I know," she said, "but I've spent so long running on autopilot, doing what's expected, not what I want. I don't want to do that here." Jack's chest tightened at that, at the way her voice trembled with resolve. He understood more than she might have guessed, the weight of living for someone else's script. He'd done it too, in his own way, holding everything together for Ellie, for the town, until he'd forgotten what it felt like to want something for himself. "Then don't," he said simply, meeting her gaze. "You're here now. That's what matters." Lena's eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through them, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. It wasn't much, just a curve of her lips, but it hit Jack hard, stirring something deep and restless he'd tried to bury. He cleared his throat, stepping back. "Come on. Ellie'll be up soon. She'll want breakfast." Lena nodded, following him inside, and the cabin felt warmer somehow, like her decision to stay had breathed life into the walls. Ellie bounded into the kitchen not long after, her hair a wild tangle as she climbed onto a stool. "Pancakes again?" she asked, her hazel eyes bright with hope. Jack chuckled, ruffling her curls. "You're spoiled, kid." But he grabbed the flour anyway, and Lena slid in beside him, her shoulder brushing his as she reached for the eggs. They moved together like they'd done it 100 times, him mixing the batter, her cracking shells with a focus that made him smile. Ellie watched, swinging her legs, and piped up. "Miss Lena, are you going to live with us forever?" Lena froze, her hand hovering over the bowl, and Jack felt his own breath catch. He glanced at her, waiting, and she laughed, a nervous, shaky sound. "Forever's a big word." "Ellie, me when was," she said, her voice gentle. "But I'm staying for now." "How's that, duh?" Ellie tilted her head, considering, then grinned. "Good enough." Jack exhaled, a tension he hadn't realized he was holding slipping away. He flipped a pancake, the sizzle filling the quiet, and caught Lena's eye. She smiled, softer this time, and he knew they were both feeling it, the slow, unsteady build of something real. Later that day, Jack headed out to check on the town's generator shed, a hulking metal box that kept Haven's Hollow humming through the winter. Lena came along, tugging on her borrowed coat, her boots crunching beside his in the snow. "You don't have to," he said, glancing at her. She shrugged, her breath clouding. "I want to free. Keeps me busy." He nodded, a faint grin tugging at his mouth, and they walked in companionable silence, the mountains looming silent and white around them. At the shed, Jack pried open the door, the hinges groaning, and set to work, his hands moving with the ease of muscle memory. Lena watched, leaning against the frame, her curiosity palpable. "How'd you learn all this?" she asked, nodding at the tangle of wires he was untangling. Jack shrugged, not looking up. "Picked it up. Dad was a handyman. Guess it stuck." She nodded, stepping closer, her shadow falling across his work. "My dad never fixed anything," she said, Wafton, her voice quieter now. "He just paid people to make problems go away." There was a bitterness there, sharp and fleeting, and Jack paused, meeting her eyes. "Sounds lonely," he said, blunt but not unkind. Lena's lips pressed together, and she nodded. It was. She hesitated, then crouched beside him, her hands hovering like she wanted to help. "Shahna, show me," she said, her tone firm. Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised. but handed her a wrench. "Hold this here," he said, pointing to a bolt. She did, her grip awkward but steady, and he guided her through the steps, their hands brushing as he adjusted her hold. Her focus was intense, her brow furrowed, and Jack found himself watching her more than the wires. Her determination, her quiet strength. "Not bad," he said when they finished, and she grinned, a flush of pride coloring her cheeks. Back at the cabin, the day faded into evening, the sky bruising purple over the pines. Ellie was sprawled by the fire, her crayons scattered, while Lena sat beside her, sketching something on a scrap of paper. Jack lingered in the doorway, watching them, a warmth spreading through him that he couldn't shake. Lena glanced up, catching his eye, and held up her drawing, a rough sketch of the cabin, the mountains rising behind it. "What do you think?" she asked. A little shy, he stepped closer, taking it in, the careful lines, the way she'd captured the place he called home. "It's good," he said, his voice rough. "Real good." That night, after Ellie was in bed, Jack found Lena on the couch, her knees drawn up, staring at the fire. He settled beside her, the cushions dipping under his weight, and the silence felt different now, charged, intimate. "Dormasa so intiman." "You're getting the hang of this place," he said, his tone casual but his eyes on her. She smiled, small and tired, trying to... "It's different. Good, different." He nodded, leaning back, their shoulders brushing. "You don't talk much about where you came from," he said, not pushing, just observing. Lena's smile faded, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Not much to say. It's all boardrooms and fake smiles. People who'd sell you out for a better deal." Her voice was low, edged with something raw. Jack frowned, turning to her. "And you?" She met his gaze, her eyes dark and steady. "I didn't want to be that person, but I didn't know how to be anything else, until now." Her words hung there, heavy and honest, and Jack felt them settle into him, stirring something deep. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. She didn't pull away, just looked at him, her breath hitching slightly. "You're not that person here," he said, his voice low but certain. "You're Lena. That's enough." Her eyes shimmered, a tear slipping free, and she squeezed his hand. Sore hard, like it was an anchor. "Thank you," she whispered, and the gratitude in her voice broke something open in him. A wall he'd built brick by brick since Sarah left, crumbling under the weight of her trust. They sat there, Tyrannon, hands clasped, the fire crackling low. And Jack felt the shift, subtle but seismic. He didn't know where this was going. Not exactly, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to find out. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the cabin was warm, alive with the quiet promise of something new. The next morning, Jack woke to a knock at the door. Sharp, insistent, cutting through the stillness. He shuffled out of bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and found Ira Jenkins on the porch, his cane planted in the snow. "Morning." "Tanner." "Dorfurm," Ira said, his gravelly voice carrying a hint of urgency. "Town's got a problem. Generators on the fritz again, and half the hollows without power." Jack nodded, already reaching for his coat. "Hey, I'll take a look." Ira's eyes flicked past him, to where Lena was emerging from the guest room. Her hair mussed. "Bring your helper," he said with a wry grin. "She's got steady hands." Lena blinked, surprised, but grabbed her coat without hesitation. "I'm in the room," she said, her voice firm. And Jack felt a surge of pride he didn't try to hide. They trudged into town together, Ellie staying with Mrs. Perry, Corelliween, the snow crunching under their boots as Ira filled them in. Old wiring, a blown fuse, the kind of mess that could leave folks freezing if they didn't move fast. At the generator shed, Jack took the lead, Lena at his side, her hands steady as she held tools and followed his instructions. The townsfolk gathered, watching, and Jack caught their curious glances. Lena wasn't just a stranger anymore. Not to them, not to him. By noon, the power hummed back to life, lights flickering on down the street. Ira clapped Jack on the shoulder, then nodded at Lena. "You're a quick study," he said. She smiled, brushing snow from her gloves. "Had a good teacher." Tornanamon, Sir Nazimer. Jack's ears burned, but he didn't argue. As they walked back, the sun high and bright, he felt her hand slip into his, tentative but sure. and he squeezed it, a quiet promise passing between them. Haven's Hollow stretched out before them, alive and breathing, and for the first time, Jack didn't feel like he was carrying it alone. The sun hung high over Haven's Hollow, its light cutting through the chill and painting the snow in blinding streaks of white. Jack and Lena walked back from the generator shed, their hands still clasped, her fingers cold but firm against his. The town buzzed faintly around them, folks stepping out to check their lights, a few kids darting through the drifts with shrieks of laughter. Jack felt the weight of their stares, the quiet curiosity of a place where everyone knew everyone, and a stranger sticking around was news worth whispering about. But with Lena beside him, her shoulder brushing his every few steps, he didn't mind the attention, not as much as he thought he would. She glanced at him, catching his eye, and smiled, a small, private thing that made his chest tighten. "What does Hunsuorn?" he asked, his voice gruff but warm. "Nothing," she said, shaking her head. "Just feels good." Helping, Jack nodded, his thumb brushing over her knuckles absent-mindedly. "Yeah, Desikidman." He didn't say more. Didn't need to. Lena got it. The satisfaction of fixing something tangible. Something that mattered. It was a language he'd spoken alone for years, and now she was learning it too. Her hands dirtied alongside his. Back at the cabin, Ellie greeted them with a flying hug, her small arms wrapping around Jack's legs before she latched onto Lena. "Did you fix it? Daddy or I?" "Sorry. Did Miss Lena help?" Jack crouched, ruffling her curls. "We got it." "Kitino, Mom." And then Keto, "Power's back on." Ellie beamed, turning to Lena. "You're strong like Daddy." Lena laughed, a flush creeping up her cheeks. "Not quite," she said, but her eyes flicked to Jack, and he saw the pride there. Quiet but real. He stood, brushing snow from his coat, and caught her looking, a heartbeat too long, a spark flaring between them that he felt down to his bones. The day unfolded slow and easy, the kind of afternoon Haven's Hollow seemed made for. Jack tinkered in the shed, patching up an old sled, while Lena and Ellie built a snow fort in the yard, their laughter drifting through the crisp air. He paused every so often, leaning on his workbench to watch them. Ellie's wild energy, Lena's steady calm. It hit him hard. How natural it felt. How she'd slipped into their lives like she'd always been there. His hands stilled on the wood, a ache blooming in his chest, not pain, exactly, but something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel since Sarah. He shoved it down, focusing on the task, but it lingered, stubborn and warm. By evening, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo, stars prickling through the cold. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight, the smell of roasted potatoes and venison filling the air. Jack cooked. Lena set the table, and Ellie chattered about her 40, her voice a bright thread weaving them together. They ate in comfortable silence, the clink of forks and Ellie's giggles the only sounds until Lena spoke, her tone tentative. "I was thinking, on she warned for Sunday," she said, glancing at Jack. "About the town. There's a lot that could be done, fixed up. I mean, Inara would. The schoolhouse down the road, it's falling apart." Jack paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Yeah. Been empty since the county cut funding years back." Lena nodded, her eyes lighting up. "What if we fixed it? Made it something again, a place for kids." For Ellie, one unafforted Surrey, Surnikanokuriwarn. He frowned, surprised, and set his fork down. "That's a big project. Takes money." Hands. Lena's lips pressed together, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face. "I've got money," she said quietly. "More than I know what to do with. I could fund it, supplies, whatever's needed. But I'd want you to lead it." "Master Jack, you know this place, Sir Warrenes, in need in a sermon." He leaned back, processing. The idea wasn't new. He'd thought about the schoolhouse before. The way it sat there rotting, a ghost of what the town used to be. But Lena's offer, the way she looked at him, earnest, determined, through him. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice low. "This isn't your mess to clean up." She shook her head, leaning forward. "It's not about that. I've spent my life watching people use money to take, to control. I want to use it to give something back. To you, to Ellie, Srianawanti, to this town. Let me do this." "Shekinum," roared Jack. Her words hit him hard, cracking open something he'd kept locked tight. He glanced at Ellie, who was watching them with wide, curious eyes. "Sir, one and one." Then back at Lena. "No strings?" he asked. his tone guarded. Sonnenunterstütz, she said firmly, holding his gaze. Jack exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'll think on it, he said finally. Lena nodded, relief washing over her face, and Ellie piped up. Can I help too? They both laughed, the tension breaking, and Jack felt the weight of her offer settle. Not a burden, but a possibility. Later, after Ellie was tucked in, Jack stood by the fire, staring at the flames while Lena lingered in the kitchen. Washing dishes? Italia on the guantes, he heard her footsteps approach, soft and deliberate, and turned as she stopped beside him. You don't have to say yes, she said, her voice quiet. I want to be part of this place, really part of it. Jack studied her, the faint lines of fatigue under her eyes, the resolve in her jaw, and felt something shift inside him. I know, he said, and I'm not saying no, just not used to people offering without wanting something back. Lena's lips curved, a sad, knowing smile. I get that, but all I want is this, right here. She gestured vaguely at the cabin, at him, and Jack's throat tightened. He stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her, and rested a hand on her shoulder. Then you've got it, he said, his voice rough but sure. Her eyes shimmered, and she leaned into him, just slightly, her head resting against his chest. He froze for a heartbeat, then wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, the fire crackling beside them as the world outside faded away. The next morning, Jack woke early, slipping out to the schoolhouse before the sun broke the horizon. The building loomed in the gray dawn, its whitewash peeling, its windows cracked, a skeleton of what it had been. He ran a hand along the siding, picturing it whole again. Kids running through the yard, Ellie's laughter echoing off the walls. Lena's words played in his head. I want to use it to give something back. And he felt a spark of something he hadn't in years. Purpose, bigger than just getting by. When he got back, Lena was up, pouring coffee. Her hair mussed from sleep. She looked at him, curious for the very once. Where'd you go? Jack set his coat down, meeting her gaze. Schoolhouse. Been thinking about what you said. Her eyes widened, hope flickering there. And he took a breath, the decision settling like stone. I'm in, but you're not just funding it, you're helping. Hands on. Deal. Lena blinked, then grinned, bright and unguarded. Deal, she said, and Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. Solid and new. Words spread fast, too fast. Jack thought, as Millie showed up that afternoon with a basket of rolls and a sly grin. Heard you're fixing up the schoolhouse, she said, eyeing Lena. Town's buzzing. Jack grunted, but Lena smiled, unfazed. It's just a start, she said. Millie nodded, handing Jack a roll. Good start. Folks'll pitch in, you'll see. And they did. By the end of the week, Ira brought a stack of lumber. Mrs. Perry offered paint, and half a dozen others showed up with tools, their sleeves rolled up, ready to work. Jack led the charge, hammer in hand, while Lena hauled boards and mixed paint, her hands blistered but her face alive with purpose. Ellie darted between them, helping with a toy hammer, her giggles cutting through the clatter. The schoolhouse took shape, new roof, patched walls, windows gleaming, and with every nail driven, Jack felt the town knit tighter, a thread of hope pulling them together. Lena was at the heart of it, not as some rich outsider throwing cash around, but as one of them, her sweat mixing with theirs. One night, after a long day of work, Jack found Lena on the porch, the moon high and full. She glanced at him as he joined her, her smile tired but content. Never thought I'd find this, she said softly. What do we consider, Mom? Ishenten? He asked, leaning beside her. A place that feels like mine. Sure, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Jack's chest ached, and he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It is, he said, quiet but certain. You made it that way. She looked at him, tears glinting in her eyes, and leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. He held her close, the night wrapping around them, and knew this was home. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel notification bell so you never see you in the next video. Take care and have a great day.